The Supreme Court didn't even bother to explain. No comment. No debate. No written opinion. No back and forth between the justices. No dissent. No concurrence. Nothing. Just a denial. A single word on a piece of paper that sealed the fate of a woman sitting in a cell in Gatesville, Texas. I've been covering true crime for a while now, and I've watched a lot of appeals get denied. But I have to be honest with you. When I read this one, I sat with it for a minute, because the silence of it is something. 9 justices, the highest court in the country, and not one of them felt the need to say a single word about Taylor Parker. That silence speaks. She is going to die in Texas. My name is Crime Tage, and this is where Taylor Parker's story ends. Now, before I get into what the Supreme Court decision actually means, and there are details here that I promise you are not getting anywhere else right now, I need to take you back to the beginning. Because some of you just finished watching Maternal Instinct on Netflix. Some of you heard about this case from a podcast. And some of you are coming to this completely fresh today. Either way, you need the full picture. Because you cannot understand the weight of what just happened in that Supreme Court building without understanding the weight of what happened in a small house in New Boston, Texas on October 9th, 2020. So let's go back. Taylor Parker grew up in East Texas, and by every account from everyone who ever knew her, she was a liar. Not the occasional white lie that everyone tells, not the kind of small social fictions that get you through awkward situations. Compulsive, elaborate, theatrical, committed lying. The kind that requires planning. The kind that requires maintenance. The kind that requires you to remember what you told each person so your stories don't fall apart when those people compare notes. Her family knew it. Her friends figured it out eventually. And every single time she got caught, she didn't change. She just found new people. She had 2 children from earlier relationships. Children she walked away from. She gave up custody and kept moving. She got married, divorced, married again. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, she had a medical procedure. A hysterectomy, complete, total, permanent. She could never carry a pregnancy again. I want you to hold on to that fact, because everything that comes after it only makes sense when you keep that fact in mind. When Taylor Parker met Wade Griffin, she was 27 years old. Wade was exactly the kind of man she needed. Sweet, honest, trusting. The kind of guy who took people at their word because he was the kind of guy whose word actually meant something. Taylor Parker looked at Wade Griffin and saw a fresh audience. She told him she came from money. Oil money. Texas oil money. The inheritance kind. The kind where you don't have to work, you just have to wait for the checks to clear. She talked about ranches and property deals and a future together that sounded like something off a TV show. Wade believed her. And why wouldn't he? Who lies about oil money? Who constructs that specific a lie for no obvious reason? Taylor Parker, that's who. There was always a delay. Always some paperwork hiccup. Always her mother holding things up. Always some reason the money was coming but just hadn't arrived yet. And while she was spinning that story, Wade was spending real money on a life she had invented. Farm equipment, vehicles, a truck, building towards something that didn't exist. And then she told him she was pregnant. She was not pregnant. She had a hysterectomy. She could not get pregnant. Not possibly. But she told Wade they were having a baby. And then she did what Taylor Parker does with every lie. She committed to it completely. She ordered a silicone baby bump online and wore it every day. She ordered fake ultrasounds off the internet, printed them out, convincing enough to show a proud father. She got fake doctor's reports. She planned a full gender reveal party. She posted on social media. She took photos. She built an entire 9-month performance around a pregnancy that could not have existed under any biological circumstances. And for months, it worked. Here's the thing about pregnancies, though. They have due dates, and due dates are not flexible. When you tell someone you're pregnant, eventually the calendar catches up with you, and you have to produce something real. Most people who fake pregnancies find their way out of it with a fake miscarriage. It's devastating for everyone involved. There's grief and confusion and pain. But the lie ends, and nobody gets hurt in any physical sense. Taylor Parker chose a different exit. She had been working as a photographer on the side, wedding photographer. The kind of work that gets you into people's most intimate moments. That gets you trusted. That gets you welcomed into places you might not otherwise be allowed. That's how she met Reagan Simmons Hancock. Reagan was 21 years old. I want to stop here for a second because I think in all the coverage of this case, Reagan gets a little lost. The story gets framed around Taylor Parker because Taylor Parker is the extraordinary thing. The lie, the psychology, the audacity, the crime. And Reagan becomes background. But Reagan is the whole point. Reagan Michelle Simmons Hancock was 21 years old. She was from New Boston, Texas. Small town, a few thousand people. The kind of community where you leave your door unlocked and you recognize every car on your street. And tragedy feels like something that happens somewhere else. Reagan had a toddler daughter at home, a little girl who called her mama and needed her every single day. She was 35 weeks pregnant with her second child, a baby girl, already named Braxlin, already loved, already anticipated. Reagan's husband was already thinking about what it would be like to have 2 daughters. Reagan and Taylor became friends. Close friends. They were going to be pregnant together, 2 women, 2 babies, 2 families growing up side by side. That is what Reagan thought was happening. She trusted Taylor. She had photographed her wedding. She had been to her home. She had shared things with her the way you share things with a friend you believe in. And on the morning of October 9th, 2020, Reagan let her friend in the door. 7:30 in the morning. I'm going to tell you what happened factually, because the facts don't need any help being devastating. Taylor attacked her. She beat her. She stabbed her. She strangled her. And then, while Reagan was dying in her own home, Taylor Parker used a scalpel to cut open her friend's abdomen and remove the baby from her womb. Reagan Simmons Hancock died on the floor of her house. Her toddler daughter was somewhere in that house. Taylor Parker walked out of that house with Braxlin on her lap and got in her car. A state trooper noticed her driving erratically on the highway and pulled her over. And while that trooper was literally behind her, Taylor Parker was on the phone with 911, claiming she had just given birth in her car and needed help getting to the hospital. She drove to a hospital in Idabel, Oklahoma. She walked in and said, "This is my baby. I just gave birth. Help me." And here is where the specific irony of Taylor Parker's entire existence caught up with her in a single moment. Because Taylor Parker has spent her entire life believing she is smarter than everyone around her. She has spent her whole life lying her way through every situation and landing on her feet. She has never faced a consequence she couldn't talk her way out of. Science does not care about that. A medical examination can tell with absolute certainty whether a woman has recently given birth. There are specific, measurable, undeniable biological signs. Taylor Parker showed none of them. 0. Because she hadn't given birth. She had a hysterectomy years earlier. The medical staff knew immediately. The police were already on their way because Reagan had been found. Braxlin died at the hospital. Taylor Parker was arrested in a hospital gown, handcuffed in an emergency room, walked to a police car in bare feet. She was 30 years old. She was on her way to Texas death row. She just didn't fully understand that yet. The trial was in the fall of 2022, Bowie County, Texas. The community that Reagan came from. The community that had been living inside this case for 2 years. On November 9th, 2022, Taylor Parker was sentenced to death. She became the 7th woman on Texas death row. And here is a detail that I find genuinely remarkable. She was the first woman in the state of Texas to receive a death sentence in 12 years. 12 years. The last one was a woman named Kimberly Cargill in 2012. Texas sentences people to death regularly, but female death sentences are rare even in Texas. And the fact that this jury in this community made that choice without hesitation tells you something about what they saw and what they heard during those weeks in that courtroom. And then the appeal started. Now, I need to explain something because I think a lot of people heard Supreme Court denied and thought the story was over. She's going to be executed soon. This is the end. It's not quite that simple. And understanding why requires understanding how the death penalty appeals process actually works, because it is genuinely one of the most confusing things in American law. And I want to make it make sense. Think of it like a house with 2 different doors. The front door is called direct appeals. That's the visible process. That's what gets covered in the news. That's where the defense goes to the courts and says something went wrong during the trial. Wrong legal ruling, wrong evidence admitted. Constitutional violation. Juror misconduct. Anything that affected whether the trial was fair. Direct appeals go up through the state court system and then to the Supreme Court of the United States. That front door is now locked for Taylor Parker. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, the highest criminal court in Texas, reviewed her case and issued their opinion on November 7, 2025. Judge Lee Finley wrote it. Her legal team had raised 25 separate arguments for why something went wrong at trial. 25. Judge Finley reviewed every single one of them. And the final line of his opinion reads exactly like this. Finding no reversible error, we affirm appellant's conviction and sentence of death. 25 arguments. 0 that worked. Taylor Parker's team then did what you do when you've exhausted the state courts. They went to the Supreme Court of the United States and filed their petition on March 19, 2026. On May 29, 2026, the Supreme Court denied it. No comment. No explanation. No justice wrote a single word about Taylor Parker. 9 people looked at this case and decided it wasn't worth their time to address. The front door of the house is locked. But let me tell you what was actually inside that Supreme Court petition, because this is the part that nobody else is really digging into right now, and I think it matters. Taylor Parker's lawyers made 3 specific arguments. The first was about the trial location. They argued that the media coverage in Bowie County was so overwhelming, social media so saturated with opinion about this case, that there was no way to find 12 genuinely impartial people to serve on that jury. Before the trial, they had asked for a change of venue. Move it somewhere else. The judge said no, and the defense argued that decision was the original sin that tainted everything that followed. The Supreme Court was not moved. No comment. The second argument is the one that made me set my phone down when I read it the first time. Taylor Parker's own lawyers argued that Braxlin Sage Hancock was born dead. I'm going to sit with that for a second because I want to make sure you understand what is being said there. The baby. The baby that Taylor cut from Reagan's womb. The baby she drove to Oklahoma with. The baby she tried to present as her own in a hospital emergency room. Taylor Parker's defense team looked at all the evidence and decided that their best argument was that Braxlin was not alive when she left her mother's body. Here's why that argument exists legally. Under Texas law, for Taylor Parker to be eligible for the death penalty, the prosecution had to prove kidnapping as part of the capital murder charge. And you cannot kidnap a person who was never alive. If Braxlin was born dead, there was no kidnapping. No kidnapping means no death penalty eligibility. Taylor Parker might still go to prison for the rest of her life, but she would not be executed. That was the calculation her lawyers made. Think about what it means that they made it. Her own defense team was essentially arguing that the crime was so violent, so immediate, so savage, that the baby did not survive the initial attack. That Reagan was already dying when the scalpel was used. That Braxlin never had a chance. The courts looked at flight paramedic testimony, doctor testimony, medical evidence from the hospital, and they determined that a rational juror would find beyond a reasonable doubt that Braxlin Sage Hancock was born alive at the time Taylor Parker removed her and drove away. That argument failed at the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, and the Supreme Court was not interested in revisiting it. The third argument is the one I have genuinely been going back and forth on since I first read it. Taylor Parker's legal team argued that prosecutors used fat-shaming evidence during her trial, that they repeatedly introduced evidence about her weight, her physical appearance, her body, in ways that were designed to make the jury hate her rather than evaluate the case on its actual merits. Now, I know how that sounds. And I know what your first reaction probably is because it was my first reaction too. This woman murdered her friend and cut a baby from her womb. Who cares if someone called her fat? But then I read about the Brenda Andrew case. Brenda Andrew was a woman in Oklahoma whose death sentence was vacated in January 2025 by the Supreme Court. The reason was that prosecutors during her trial had introduced extensive evidence about her sex life and her physical appearance in ways that the court found improper, that it was intended to make jurors despise her personally rather than weigh the evidence fairly. Taylor Parker's lawyers read that ruling and said the same thing happened to their client. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals disagreed. Judge Finley found that the evidence about Taylor's appearance and body was relevant, that it helped explain the psychology behind her decisions, that it was part of showing who she was and why she did what she did. The Supreme Court was not interested in the question. No comment. All three arguments. Gone. So, what happens now? Here's where the back door of the house comes in. It's called Habeas Corpus review. And it is a completely different legal process from anything we've talked about so far. Habeas Corpus doesn't look at what happened during the trial. It looks at things that weren't part of the trial record at all. New evidence that wasn't available before. Claims that her trial lawyers missed something important. Constitutional violations that nobody raised the first time around. Habeas corpus runs through both state courts and federal courts. It is slower than direct appeals. Much slower. It gets less coverage. It's less visible. But it is real. There are people who have been on Texas death row for 20 years while their habeas corpus proceedings continue. Darlie Routier, who Ashley Banfield mentioned, has been there since 1997. Almost 30 years, still on death row, still with an active legal process. Death penalty cases in Texas don't move fast. The average time between sentencing and execution is roughly 10.5 years, and that's the average. Some cases move faster. Some cases stretch much longer. Taylor Parker was sentenced in November 2022. She is 33 years old. If the average timeline holds, she will be in her early 40s before an execution date is even set. The Supreme Court just locked the front door, but the back door of habeas corpus is still there. Her lawyers are going to spend years trying every key they have. No date exists for Taylor Parker. No date will exist anytime soon. What happened on May 29th is not the end of the story. It is the end of the first chapter of the story that comes after the crime. I want to come back to Reagan before I wrap up, because I feel like I owe her that. In all the coverage of this case, in all the podcast episodes and Netflix documentaries and news reports, Reagan Simmons Hancock tends to fade. She becomes the crime instead of the person. She becomes what was done to her instead of who she was before it happened. The case is called the Taylor Parker case. The documentary is about Taylor Parker. Even this video is about Taylor Parker's appeal. But this story is Reagan's story. Reagan was 21 years old. 21. She had barely started. She had a toddler daughter at home who needed her every single morning. She was 35 weeks along with her second daughter. She was almost there. A few more weeks, and she would have been holding Braxlin, introducing her to her big sister, taking photos, sending them to her mother and her mother-in-law and everyone who had been waiting. She trusted her friend. That is the thing I cannot get past no matter how many times I go over this case. She trusted the woman who showed up at her door at 7:30 in the morning. She let her in, because that is what you do when your friend comes to your house. You let them in. Reagan's older daughter is 5 or 6 years old now. Old enough to notice that other kids have moms and she doesn't. Old enough to ask questions. Old enough to feel the shape of the absence even if she doesn't fully understand what filled it. What do you tell that little girl? What do you tell her about the morning her mother died? About the friend? About what happened in their house? About the sister she never got to meet? I don't have an answer for that. I don't think anyone does. What I do know is that the Supreme Court of the United States on May 29th, 2026, looked at what happened to Reagan and Braxlin and confirmed that the woman responsible is going to be executed by the state of Texas. Not today, not tomorrow, not next year probably, but the direction of travel is set. Every court in America has reviewed this. Every argument Taylor Parker's lawyers could make has been made and rejected. The front line of her defense is gone. Reagan Simmons Hancock deserved better than October 9th, 2020, and slowly, through a legal process that moves in years, not months, the courts of this country are moving toward giving her family something that looks like justice. If you're following this case, subscribe. I will bring you every update as the habeas corpus process develops. I will be here when an execution date is set. And I will be here for Reagan. Thank you for watching. Taylor Parker was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death on November 9th, 2022 in Bowie County, Texas. Her conviction and sentence were upheld by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals on November 7th, 2025. Her petition for review was denied by the United States Supreme Court on May 29th, 2026. This video is based entirely on publicly available court records and reporting from the Texarkana Gazette, TXK Today, Texas Scorecard, and KTAL News. Brian Hooker has not been formally charged with any crime. All individuals are presumed innocent unless formally charged and convicted in a court of law.